Hello. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello, everyone. It's good to see you. We're continuing our discussion with authors of this book, Legal Operations in the Age of AI and Data. I am really excited about today's conversation. It is with somebody who's been in the house for a very long time, have seen before, during, and after of various technologies. She is an advocate for mental health and a woman of many talents. So without further ado, super excited to have this conversation. Tara, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. For folks who haven't met you before, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Tara Trantham, as Olga mentioned, and I am an attorney. Worked over 23 years in-house, primarily in financial services practices. I have one son who is playing football all the time, and one of my top passions is mental health awareness and standing up, speaking out, and seeking help. Thank you, Olga.
Of course, I love it. I have a child who is playing volleyball. My life is very much colored by that
Yes.
experience. I have another who plays golf, and that is another experience that very much colors my life. So definitely, I can relate to that. 23 years in house, that's a lot of years in house in financial industry, which is one of the sort of harder places to be because it is highly regulated, very high compliance expectations and standards. Tell us more about that scenic route of practicing law. How did you get in, and how did that progress?
Yeah, my journey is a bit interesting and different, perhaps. I did not work at a law firm. The only time that I did work at a law firm is when I was in law school. So as a law clerk. And I went initially as business contract specialist at a healthcare organization for around 2 years, primarily because I wanted to get back towards home, which is North Carolina. And this was in Greenville, South Carolina. It was a healthcare company focused on medical imaging and film. And after that, I just went directly into financial services and moved my way up, partially because the assistant general counsel left after I had been there 6 months. And then the general counsel left after a year. So all of a sudden, I was the only counsel at this large corporation. And that's really how my journey began.
AGC left after 6 months. GC left after another 6 months. Tell
Yes.
me more. I don't need the details of what happened, but I'm more curious kind of how you as a professional thought about your career and how you navigated. I mean, those are massive changes, especially in financial institutions.
Yes, initially, Olga and everyone, I knew what I didn't know, and I did rely more on outside counsel, particularly for the first year and a half. I had all of HR, I had audit, I had compliance, vendor management, the gamut. And for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I spent, a little bit more with in-house, with outside counsel spend, which I had let my CEO know. I remember going into his office at the time saying, "You realize I've only been out of school like 3 years, right?" But actually sort of digging in and getting into the details and having that much responsibility, it was almost trial by fire. And I do believe that my career was catapulted by the fact that I had to sink or swim, but I did ensure that I had outside counsel assistance.
I'm really curious because a lot of us kind of get to that point in our lives where we sink or swim, we learn by doing. That's very common, in for professional general and in-house specifically. I love that you are highlighting the critical role of outside counsel in that and how important that has been in your journey as in-house lawyer. From your point of view, what made that relationship valuable and how can outside counsel position themselves to be more helpful, especially in those periods of transition, especially when in-house lawyer may or may not have industry experience or frankly in-house experience?
Right. That's a great question, Olga. Thank you for asking that question. When I first began, again, I utilize outside counsel, a bit more. But one line that I've trained other attorneys and my legal team, as I've had large staffs of paralegals and attorneys and various other positions in the department, was to say, when do you go to outside counsel? And one line and demarcation I would say is that one, if you do not have the expertise, for example, specialties in law, ERISA, the areas that, I did not have specialties. All of us have different skills where we do have in-depth knowledge. That would be one. And the other is when, overflow, when you just do not have the resources in-house to handle it. And those are some of the two guiding principles I used. And to help outside counsel, I believe that one of the most important things is to understand that general counsel, we're not working at a law firm. And so our CEOs or board or, our reporting line is not looking for a 50-page memorandum of law or a lot of details. What they would like to know, from my experience, is can we do this? Can we not do this? Why? And what's the risk versus benefit? And I think having outside counsel that understands that and having that relationship where you can say, hey, I really need this and I need to know the bottom line. That's what my CEO and board wants to know. It was very helpful in my experience.
Love that. So let's talk about this book. You wrote a chapter mentioning general counsel and investigations and in the absence of legal technology. Tell us more about kind of why you decided to contribute and what is the main takeaway of your chapter?
I decided to contribute, hearing from you and, the team that had written this book. I thought it was just amazing that had edited and that came together. So one, it was just amazing to work with this incredible group of attorneys. Secondarily, I felt that my experience was so much time consuming for the department and for the company and costly, due primarily to the fact that we did not have a lot, well, hardly any legal technology, AI, any of those things that it's so great to have now. And I felt like sharing that even helps other attorneys and in-house counsel now and corporations as well to understand that providing that assistance and legal technology to your legal and compliance team in the long run saves so much money. So that is the reason I want to contribute, to show the value of legal technology to legal operations and your legal and compliance teams, but also to the corporation's bottom line.
So what happened? What happened before technology? What just in the high level, what was the experience and that what are the facts and kind of what you wish it were?
Yes. So I received a CID, the company did, from the CFPB. And then at the same time, there was other investigation from the Department of Justice. And so from a high level, there was voluminous amounts of discovery and documentation to pull together to hand over to these federal agencies. And had we had a system where the legal system of litigation and complaints and the things that, both, well, multiple federal agencies were asking of my company at the time, it would have saved us approximately 3.5 years in time. Not only that, millions, hundreds and millions of dollars of expense. We had to pull things manually. And I mean that, pulling 5 years of legal complaints manually on a spreadsheet, pulling together systems manually.
I love that. So, for folks who don't know, CFPB is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is as threatening as it sounds. Department of Justice, I think many folks are familiar with that. That's a litigation arm of the federal government. That's a no joke experience too. 5 years of that joy. How did that go?
It was stressful for all of us. And, from a corporate perspective and in-house counsel, I think one thing that my chapter also helped understand is that while your in-house team and your compliance team and your paralegals are working on gathering this information manually and did not have the legal technology, you're also dealing with the business teams that are having to provide you all that information. So rather than growing the business and doing your business, making the company work day to day, you're taking your time and staffing FTE on pulling together information for these federal agencies. So it was a huge impact.
And it's interesting you say it took 5 years, but it didn't have to be this long of a journey. If you had sort of access to technology or able to convince folks to utilize it more intentionally, that could have been a more streamlined, easier way. Tell us more about that. You don't know often hear folks say that. I'm just curious, how did you get to that conclusion? And what do you think if you were to do this today, how would you do it differently?
You know, I came to the conclusion after going through, what my department and team and corporation went through. Again, on day one, it was a publicly traded company. On day one, when we had to announce it, in our SEC, which is Security Exchange Commission, that public companies have to do, we lost almost 250 million market share in one day. So I believe differently. What I would have done is try to advocate more to the CEO, to the board, and find ways to show the value of technology and systems and the things that could help your legal department be more lean and mean and available, to provide information and data. And I'm so grateful now to see that things are changing, that the legal department and the compliance department are seen as strategic partners rather than a cost center. And back in the day, I've been working a long time. We were seen as a cost center, and it was hard to prove the negative. So I think what I would have done differently is found ways to show the data. But again, that goes back to having the legal technology to show the data.
It is a compelling argument that we can prevent the loss of 250 million shares. That's very compelling. And yes, that didn't sound like a fun CC filing to go through. You also mentioned passion for mental health and those kind of issues in the workforce and for in-house lawyers and for lawyers generally. How did that what happened? How did you become passionate about mental health issues?
You know, Olga, going back to what I was discussing, the 5.5 years of serious investigations that I found myself the chief legal officer of $1 billion publicly traded corporation. I did meet with the FBI at 3 o'clock in the morning and dealing with SEC and Department of Justice and going to Washington to meet with these various folks, questioning me. And it was a very difficult process. So transitioning to the corporate world of how that affected me, I had severe anxiety, severe depression. I wasn't sleeping enough. I wasn't doing the things I needed to do. And it came to a point where I attempted suicide. And I'm fine with talking about it now because I made it through. But I think the primary thing that I was concerned was that no one would take me seriously as an attorney or as a chief legal officer, this person that had it all together and that I could handle this, when I wasn't handling it all very well. I handled it well for the company. I wasn't handling it well for myself. And if I could go back and share with everyone out there, and particularly attorneys, our legal profession has such a high rate of alcohol and substance abuse and suicide and suicidal ideations and depression and anxiety. And there's such a stigma related to it. And if there's something that I could just say and articulate over and over, is that ask for help and seek help. And for the corporations to provide a safe place where your attorneys as well, and your CEOs and, everyone that is meant to be so strong, we feel that pressure to feel so strong, are able to come and say, hey, I need help. And that's what I would like to speak. And that's how I got to the place, was my own circumstance.
All right, let's talk about it. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I've had a few interactions with various federal agencies under various circumstances. I do find it's interesting that you say I've had a hard time feeling like I've been taken seriously as a chief legal officer. And in my interactions with federal agents, including FBI, they're not necessarily try to make you feel good or effective. They, actually may sometimes play tricks to kind of get to the bottom line. And, I find it very interesting that in law school or frankly anywhere else, we don't really actually get a lot of training how to interact with this highly trained professionals, top guns really. And a lot of it is sort of mental. And so if you just come to the conversation only equipped with understanding of facts and laws, you are at an incredible disadvantage and may or may not be following discussion, which sounds like actually had an effect on you, at least to some extent. And so I'm curious, how do you think we as professionals, you know, who are in house, who go with sort of best intent, if we find ourselves in the middle of, let's just say, some sort of federal investigation, trained in facts and laws, but not much else, how can we, handle those conversations much more equipped as opposed to, effectively commando?
Yeah, yeah. You know, I did come to the point where I realized that I needed to have an attorney representing me to go with me. To understand that we also need help as well, right? We're attorneys, but we need help as well. I obviously would never name the corporation. I mean, it's public information, but there was some things that I learned and that I shared and brought to the attention. And so that's a lot of pressure. And so hiring my own attorney to go and meet with me in these situations, I don't think that you should come to that, go to that table alone. And one point I wanted to clarify is that, I do believe that they were taking me fairly seriously, but I felt like that if I shared with anyone that I was also experiencing anxiety and depression, and this was affecting me mentally, that they would take me much less seriously.
Interesting. Curious. Why do you feel that? Like, what made you feel that admitting to, hey, this is serious stuff. I need to check in with myself. It actually kind of affects me because I need to figure out how to manage myself in this conversation. I'm curious why that admission of weakness, you know, was hard.
Yeah, some of it was probably, when I look back on this, may or may not have been self-imposed, meaning, I had this feeling and this idea of shame and stigma, and I believe, Olga, that so much stigma is associated with mental health conditions rather than if I said to someone, "Hey, I have neuropathy or I had a heart attack," or these sort of things. There's not the same amount of stigma at all associated with issues with your brain and the synapses in your brain and the connections. And I what I strive to say all the time is that mental health is health, and your brain and those issues are similar to your heart and any other conditions. And you know I do believe that some of it wasn't unfounded, though, because when I did get to another position in my life and I finally said, I've really got to get help. I've got to get to a psychiatrist and I need to get help. I was terminated within 48 hours of saying that. So I don't, some of it was self-imposed. Some of it I think was not. It,
No, it sounds like it was well-founded belief. If you have 48 hours of admission, you find yourself terminated. It sounds like it wasn't in your head. It sounds like it was in fact real.
yes.
And that fear makes sense. It also sounds like you had a sort of an episode that you had and you on the other side of it and had an opportunity to process. If you let's sort of what could you have done before? Because that's a suicidal episode is something that is incredibly impactful and no one should go through that if they can prevent it. What are the things that you could have done to maybe not find yourself in that event?
Thank you, Olga. I feel like that when I say seek help, what I try to share, I wrote a book and, a lot on LinkedIn about this, is that what I try to share is that not to wait like I did. Again, do not allow that, stigma. And if you seek help earlier rather than later, as I did, I felt like I had to be superwoman. Again, some of it may have been self-imposed. I was a single mom working as chief legal officer for a $1 billion publicly traded company that was involved in 2 federal investigations. And it's perfectly normal to say, hey, I need help. But I felt, and some of it was founded, as we discussed just a moment ago, that I couldn't ask for help. So 2 things I would say is that, one is seek help. And secondarily, as other legal professionals, if you feel that someone needs help, if you see something, say something and reach out and, say, hey, we're here for you. I've gone to some CLE trainings to speak on mental health and encourage the bars to have, lawyers helping lawyers, which is what we had in South Carolina when I went through this episode. And those things are so powerful because it lets you know that you're not alone. And feeling alone and isolated and such stigma placed on you was I believe, the reason why I didn't get help. And so I try to speak as loudly as I can and as many platforms as I can to say, seek help. And if you see someone that needs help, please provide them help.
Yeah. I think we're increasingly doing a lot of education and hopefully watching out for each other. I do want to talk a little bit about sort of the process of healing. At some point you were on the other side of investigations and the episode you had, and kind of had to come to terms to what happened and to make sure this never happens again, and you're healed from that. What was the process and how did you approach it?
Olga, I mentioned my son earlier, and I only have one son. And I remember coming home from the hospital that day. And my son said to me, Mom, I don't really care about our house or our pool or these things that you've done. I just need my mom. And that was the most powerful thing anyone, of course, my own child could say to me. And so how I got through it was to reprioritize. And it doesn't mean that my career is very important to me and I'm still very involved, but I also make sure daily that I'm taking care of myself first, because if I don't take care of myself, I can't support my company. I can't take care of my son. I can't take care of anyone. So I feel like that self-care, although it seems to be a buzzword in things that people say, is vitally important. It's vitally important. And I have a therapist that I see and I continue to see. And the other thing I believe that got me through is understanding that mental illness, which I have depression, I have extreme PTSD, is a lifelong journey, just as if you were diabetic and you had to take insulin. And I don't feel any shame for it. I don't feel any stigma for it anymore, but it's something that I have to continue to take care of and not let slip, again, as if you would, not take your insulin and things. And so I continue to stay in counseling. My son goes with me. And I believe that what got me through was just recognizing, hey, I have this, and my family loves me. My friends love me. And I'm not just, my life is important to people, not just what I do or what I have.
Yeah, I find that we increasingly talk normalizing therapy among legal professionals. We now have a few lawyers sort of coming out and saying that I routinely need help to deal with stressors that life throws my way professionally or personally. And we're sort of normalizing these conversations. You had an opportunity to talk at various bars association and events. What is the response of your peers and bars in those sort of open conversations about therapy, dealing with PTSD, learning tools to deal with your own stressors and stressors that you take on when you are the general counsel of a public company?
Many reactions. Oh God, I do believe that we are doing so much better normalizing it, and normalizing it primarily is speaking out, is, folks such as myself and so many others that I've, you know, become connected with during this process. But I do have to say that many times when I do speak and say these things, there is very few times when the attorneys will raise their hands, but they do come and speak to me after. So it makes me believe that there's still this sort of stigma, or that, we have to remain strong and all. But I believe the more that we can speak out and the more that we can do. And many people reach out to me, many attorneys reach out to me confidentially, but the law firms have been certainly more receptive of this, as have the bar associations. And I believe that we're making a difference. And the more that we can speak out, the more that we can do. And for our corporations, and the corporations understand that it costs hundreds of millions of dollars, a year to the corporations when someone's out for depression or anxiety or misses work or these sorts of things. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Coming to the end, I do want to talk a little bit about sort of private conversations versus public conversations. You and a few others I've talked to have observed that we may be increasingly more comfortable having private conversations, but public conversations about mental health, PTSD, depression, suicides are sort of still really hard. Maybe generally, specifically for us lawyers who are expected to be the gladiator of your company or your law firm, and there you are struggling. I'm curious, why do you think that is? And then what can we do sort of specifically to normalize? Because I think the element of doing it publicly is important, because you're just so much more likely to share it with somebody who actually needs to hear it.
Yeah, I think that the more that we do normalize it, Olga, and the more that others speak out, the more that it becomes more comfortable and safe for others. The more that even in private conversations, when one attorney, I'm speaking in our legal profession, knows that another attorney is struggling, you feel less as if, oh, wow, there's something wrong with me, or, I'm not the only one feeling this. And the more that any of us feel that we're not alone in this situation, the more that it becomes normal and the more that it becomes not so stigmatized.
And if you were to compare sort of what happens in the law firm, in the private practice, and I realize that's a gross generalization to compare every law firm, because regional differences and size differences very much will affect outcomes. Compared to what happens in the corporate department, which is again gross generalization, depending on where it is and the size, whether it's a public, private, or some other type of company or government. What do you see sort of the main differences between sort of private practice and in-house, and maybe government, but primarily in-house and law firms?
Do you mean with respect to mental health issues, Olga, or just in
Yeah,
general?
normalizing and having those conversations and kind of reactions in let's just say HR department.
Okay. Y- I am in the South, and so I believe that, our country obviously is large, the United States, and so we have different um, perspectives, but I do believe that the law firms are a bit more resistant than what you see in corporations now. I see so many corporations that are asking me to speak, coming in and talking, and then having, which we've had for a long time in corporations, is, someone call it differently, but EPA programs where you can get free counseling sessions, 3 or 4 at a time, and those sort of things. So I do think that it is more difficult at a law firm from my perspective. Now, I haven't been in a law firm, but for going and speaking at law firms and doing these things, I see more receptiveness from the corporate world than the law firms.
Why do you think that is?
I believe that the corporate world has more experience with, HR and understanding the cost of these sort of things. And again, I just feel like so much pressure on attorneys. And I that's all I really can say. I don't know. I feel like that, again, the corporations have had EPA programs for much longer, are more accustomed to this, and understanding the loss of, the bottom line as well, that corporations, when your employees are out, or, these different things. That's all I really can think of. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, they're real different. And you're right. The country is big. That's why I sort of said, there's a lot lost in that generalization. I I love our conversation. We covered a lot of ground. I love that we had an opportunity to talk about this book and about how you think your adventures with the federal agencies could have been much more streamlined with appropriate technology, and that there is sort of a real business value to the business to use tools and use them properly and use them in a timely way. I also love that we covered a lot of ground in terms of mental health in-house and law firms, and various tools you may need to make sure that you show up fully and actually practice law in the way you're meant to practice. We unfortunately come to the end, and I want to make sure you give folks sort of a takeaway. What is one thing you want to make sure they get out from this conversation and maybe implement in their lives?
The one thing I would like for everyone to take away from this wonderful conversation is that if you are experiencing issues, please seek help and don't wait. And if you know someone that you see may be having issues, particularly someone in our legal profession, reach out to them and help them, and just speak out, stand up, and seek help earlier rather than later.
Tara, thank you so much. Thank you so much for contributing to this book. Thank you for sharing your insights and coming to Know See My Legal Self. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.